My next guest was selected as the 16th overall pick by the Houston Rockets in the 2012 NBA draft. Today, he's in a different arena now as a GOP candidate for the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota. Please welcome Mr. Royce White to the show, the Stephen A. Smith Show. What's going on, man? How you doing? How's everything?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Man, please, the pleasure is all mine. I'm always interested in hearing what somebody like yourself has to say. So you ran in 2024 in Minnesota against Amy Klobuchar. You lost that election, but you got 40% of the vote. This time now, you're campaigning to run for the Senate in 2026. First of all, why? And most importantly, do you think you can win this time?
Well, again, I want to say thank you for having me on. I appreciate it a great deal. And I also appreciate you having the great Steve Bannon on recently. That's what, got me to reach out to you and try and talk to you as well. Bannon is obviously a friend of mine and an even better mentor. We call him the happy warrior because he takes his scrutiny and his prosecution, in some cases, the, witch hunt lawfare that's going on with a smile on his face. Me, I'm more of the young bull, kind of fire-breathing, nationalist, populist part of the MAGA movement, the young MAGA movement. So I appreciate you even giving me a platform. We know we've gone through a long time in this country where people like me couldn't speak. As far as the elections go, look, I think there are a lot of problems still with our elections, especially in Minnesota. I think letting illegal immigrants vote in elections is something that's an issue here in the state of Minnesota, as well as many other places in the country.
Okay.
Obviously, Donald Trump is fighting back against that, and hopefully he can get some legislation with some teeth to help out on that front in 2026. Ultimately, we know the machines are an issue, and I don't say that as a conspiracy, although if you go to my Wikipedia just a month back, it said American conspiracy theorist in the first sentence. But actually, both Amy Klobuchar and I think Kamala Harris at the time had a demonstration before a senatorial committee back in 2018 that demonstrated the machines have security issues. At that time, they were trying to say the Russians could hack our elections. Now or after in 2020, of course, the elections were completely safe. So what I'm doing it for, and what Bannon sort of commissioned me to do, is to be a younger voice that speaks to the growing wedge or divide in American politics and really politics all around the world, which is a more proto-globalist establishment, meaning a thought process that believes in global citizenship in a world without borders, for lack of, for more or less, versus a more nationalist mindset that says there's value in nationhood, there's value in the nation state, there's value in national identity and national citizenship. And that's what I've been doing since 2022. I tried to run against Ilhan in 2022. I lost the primary there. I came back in 24, won a statewide primary. Then it was only a congressional district. 2024 was obviously statewide in a primary. And so we're moving the needle. And to be quite honest, and the number one thing I want to say to you, Stephen A., before we even get going is what really drew me in to run as a Republican is how dishonest the narrative was about the Republican Party. If you remember Donald Trump coming down the escalator in 2015-16, his number one enemy was not the Democrat Party, who he had fundraised for and had many friends in. The number one enemy was the proto-globalist Republican establishment led by George Bush and the rest of his counterparts in that echelon of the Republican Party. And we're fighting the same thing here in Minnesota still. To this day, that Republican establishment has a stronghold on the party, and I represent the more grassroots movement that's fighting back.
Well, when you say you represent the more grassroots movement, is that your way of saying you've been disappointed in what conventional Republicans were doing up until the moment you decided to run in 2022 and then 2024? Or are you just simply saying these times call for a different kind of Republican and that's what you want to represent?
I'd say both.
Okay.
And to take a step back, a lot of people who are watching the show will probably know my name from being drafted, like you said, and my problems or my fight with the NBA. And we don't have time to go into all those misconceptions, though they are many. But I think they're much more interesting and important things for us to talk about, especially along policy. But it is important because my story back in 2012 was a microcosm of what we face today, and that was a proto-globalist establishment media who, at the drop of a dime, was willing to protect the NBA, even though they knew that I had a categorical winning position in that fight for mental health policy. As you
Right.
very well know,
Yeah.
when I came in the league, there was no mental health policy. Now there is one. In fact, the one they put in place in 2016 is one that I helped them develop personally.
Absolutely.
I actually added language to the. So I had a huge political victory, but it cost me a lot of money.
And you
My
were
only
willing to
point.
go out front, in fairness to you, you were willing to go out front and center and bring attention to something that a lot of people, the NBA, I'm not going to accuse them of purposely ignoring it as if they knew how detrimental it was and then chose to ignore it. I don't think anybody at that particular moment in time took mental health as seriously as you were imploring all of us to do. So that's definitely, we saw Chris Bosh later, we saw Kevin Love later, we saw litany DeMar DeRozan and stuff like that. So you definitely deserve a lot of credit for that. I'm not here to take that from you, that's for sure.
Well, and my point is, well, I had some more behind the scenes conversations with the NBA higher ups. So I have a different experience with how much they knew and how much they didn't know. For
Fair.
example, and I don't want to go into the details there, but for example, what I was fighting for back then was something simple like, okay, if we have a banned substance list in the collective bargaining agreement, and on the banned substance list you have Xanax, it would behoove the general managers, coaches, players, agents, refs, and whoever else, team trainers, to understand or at least have some sort of, baseline knowledge of why is Xanax so widely prescribed? Why is it so easy for people to get it on the street? Why is Xanax so addictive? Which ties into mental health and mental health conditions. The
Okay.
NBA wanted no part of that conversation
At the
because
time, yeah.
it was going to change the power dynamic politically within the league. And so what the story became is, well, Royce White he's a prima donna. He wants special treatment. He wants to be able to bus from Minneapolis to Chicago. And it's funny, now I see all these players sitting out a season and a half with injuries
Mm.
or load management. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, I would have never missed one game busing to a game because that's just not my mentality. I'm
Right.
tough as nails. I'm built kind of Midwest tough in
You
my
were.
basketball mind.
That's what we knew you to be.
And I played like that, right?
Right.
So I got that grit to me. So I would have never missed a game. But so that was how the narrative was manipulated. And I only bring that up to say this was 4 years before Donald Trump ever came down the escalator. And stories like mine laid the groundwork for what would be an easy movement for a lot of young men like myself into what Donald Trump created, right? So people go, well, how can you be MAGA? How are you Republican? I faced the fake news media firsthand, and it probably cost me more than $100 million well before Donald Trump ever added his name to the political arena. So
I listen to you, and let me be very, very clear. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a MAGA Republican, but I don't pride myself on being a liberal either. And when I saw you in the past being critical of some of the things that I said, I wasn't offended by it. It made me listen. I said, let me think about what he said, because I know the inclination on the left is for somebody to be so put off, then all of a sudden, I don't want you around. I want you canceled. I don't want to listen to what you have to say. Hell with all of that. I think that's one of the problems that exist in this country, in my opinion, Royce, on both sides. Meaning that I think two extremes where it doesn't encourage anybody to listen to one another and hopefully compromise. So when you brought up the fact that when you were a player, you felt like you couldn't be yourself, like you couldn't be open, rather, about where you stood politically, et cetera, I want you to elaborate from a political perspective on what it was like for you as a black man, being somebody that leans towards the GOP even before MAGA, what that has been like for you as a black man in America.
Well, again, the advent of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement is the split or the schism in modern day American politics, global politics, that is two things. On the left are the Democrats and the liberals, and I come from a culturally Democrat black community in St. Paul, Minnesota, working class, blue collar. So I'm very familiar with why black people continue to vote Democrat, with the thought process. But the thinking is something like, is the left, let's say even the far left, which some people call extreme or radical, but let's say the AOC, Bernie Sanders wing of the party, are they a genuine anti-establishment economic populist movement, or are they a radical sexual identity politics movement? And so where, even before Donald Trump, where I was critical of the NBA and saying, hey, this this institution is the watering hole for a global corporate community, and their morals and ethics and standards and their business practices have implications downstream from the institution. There were a lot of people who were traditionally liberal or Democrat that were all in support. They were fans. They were saying, hey, yeah, we support this guy. He's saying the right things. He's asking good questions. But the establishment that controls the media was not going to let that be the prominent or dominant story. So, and I bring that up because, again, if you fast forward, what Donald Trump and the MAGA movement really represents is a rejection of the institutions and the establishments that have had control of this country for the last 70 years, since World War II.
Hmm.
I love when Eric Weinstein is the brother of Brett Weinstein, and he's not a far right wing Republican by any means. He's like nominally a Democrat.
Okay.
I think he was the co-managing director of Teal Capital,
Hmm.
and he's a brilliant mathematician. And he said it best. He goes, you know, the democracy that they mention, for the people, by the people, and of the people, is not the democracy they mean when they talk about it today. What they're talking about when they say democracy is being threatened are the democratic institutions that were erected after World War II and serve as the load-bearing walls for this globalist vision of the world. And I was already pushing back on that in 2012 without even realizing it, without being able to give a name to it.
Hmm.
And I didn't understand, as being on the side with liberals and Democrats, why I was facing such a difference of reaction to fighting with the NBA. Later on, as soon as Donald Trump came down the escalator, and then later in 2020 when George Floyd died, and I was on the ground, I was in the streets,
Hmm.
I knew exactly what had happened. It clicked for me, and after that, it wasn't even a question of whether it was the Republican Party or not.
Allow me to interject by saying this. I want to be very respectful when I ask this question
Yeah.
because I'm not pointing to you specifically, but I'm pointing to the MAGA movement per se and one of the issues that I have with it. There seems to be this fealty, this undying, unwavering loyalty to Donald Trump. And my attitude is that not, and I'm not saying again, you feel that way. You can answer that question yourself. I wouldn't disrespect you like that, bro. But what I'm saying is that it comes across when you listen to a lot of people talk about MAGA in that regard. Is that a safe kind of mentality to have? Because my attitude is, okay, let's say, for example, you feel that way for Donald Trump. Let's say it's completely justified. Let's not even debate that, right? He's still supposed to be going in 2028. Where does that leave this country if everybody is feeling that way about him as opposed to policy? I would like us to focus more on policy than people. I'm talking about as a nation. And I don't think we do enough of that. To that, you say what?
That I say I 1000% agree. If you listen to my podcast, please call me crazy. Myself and the other co-hosts who I have as a part of the crew, we always talk about policy and politics in America being more policy driven and idea driven than they are
Okay.
personality and person driven.
Okay.
However, Donald Trump and look, if Donald Trump does something I don't agree with, I'm the first one to criticize him. There is no undying loyalty to Donald Trump, the person. What I do have a loyalty to is his courage to step up and say things that are inconvenient because it resonates with me because I did it
That's
myself.
what you do.
Yeah,
That's what
right.
you've done.
So I just have to respect that on GP, on general principle. But if he wavers and if he starts to not be America first or what I think is MAGA and actually, representing the nationalist populist movement that needs to happen in this country, I'll criticize him. And in fairness to him, I don't think he's going to do everything right because who can? I certainly can. If I was president, I would want people to say, hey, is he doing a good job overall? Because he can't do everything right. That's impossible. But I will say going forward, one of the main reasons I'm doing this, and one of the main
Doing
reasons I
what?
appreciate
Doing what, Royce? Doing
running
what?
for office,
Got it. Okay.
and being involved in the political
Okay.
conversation.
Sure.
And the reason I appreciate you having me on is I do believe that even in the MAGA movement, even in the Republican Party or conservative movement, there needs to be a deeper dive into the intellectual foundation framework of the ideas that we're calling our platform, because there's a lot of contradictions in there. And where those contradictions lie is where I still have to fight with the Republican Party inside. It's where Donald Trump has to often fight with the Republican Party inside. So, yes, I agree with you 1000%. It needs to be more about ideas and less about the person. But Donald Trump did he did stand up when we needed him to, and he was touched by God, in my opinion. Him not being assassinated that day, 3 bullets going by his face, can't be anything other than an act of God. If you deny that, then I don't want to stand next to you, because the bolt of lightning may become. I'm being facetious, but
Yeah,
you know what I'm
yeah.
saying.
How do you feel Donald Trump has done in his first 100 days in office?
I think he's brought a wrecking ball to what I was just mentioning. What it's called is the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. And when I realized what it was and what it intended to do, it became clear to me why the Democrat Party or the liberal establishment has had such a stronghold on the media and the narrative and politics in this country. And by that, I also mean George Bush and the mainstream establishment Republicans. Um, he he is trying to reorient the entire global uh, uh, the entire global landscape to have America stand up for what you would call national identity. And not just identity, because identity is a fickle thing, but
Hmm.
more so citizenship. You know, it was not a benign phenomenon or creation to come up with borders. Many people think of borders as, powerful people dividing land on a map to be able to conquer and pillage whatever natural resources or wealth that they can. And in many cases in history, that is the case. But borders also have a much deeper spiritual meaning that we have to acknowledge, and that is a man without boundaries, a man without limits is a man who believes that
Okay.
he's God. And yeah,
Okay, I don't
what?
disagree, but let me push back on you with this.
Okay.
You'll get no argument from me about the job he's done at the border. There was no excuse for us to have open borders in this nation.
Wait, which
That
play? Wait, which part don't you agree with? I want to track. I want to
No,
keep
no, no,
track.
no. I'm not saying any part that you said that I disagree with. I'm talking about pushing back in
Okay.
terms of some of the things that I wanted to bring
Oh,
up
him.
about his
Okay, him.
about
Okay.
him, not you.
Got it. Got it.
I have no problem with him on immigration. I think he's done an outstanding job on immigration. I think it was necessary. Do I think it's a bit extreme sometimes when you're taking somebody, if it's a student protesting and you're deporting him and what have you, when the courts are telling you no, don't do it? I got a problem with that because I'm concerned that you can ignore the courts and you can act of your own accord, because that's not what this nation of laws is built on, in my estimation. However, I'm looking at the economy. Ooh, I don't know. I mean, he's saying it's doing better. That's not what I'm hearing. I'm looking at the tariffs. I have no problem with him going after China, but you going after allies too, at least initially. And you had the allies, commingling and talking with China because they were thinking they were going to be allies with China now because they were turning against you. I'm worried about that. I'm thinking about DEI. And I'm like, I don't like it. Royce, I hope you're with me on this one. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here's the argument that I have made. Didn't earn it. That's what DEI stands for me. Didn't earn it, right? And I'm like, why does DEI automatically have to be associated with merit? Who's to say some of those people didn't have the merit warranting them to get hired? As a black man in America, I'm quite sure you've seen, as I have seen, plenty of qualified black folks that weren't getting opportunities because of the white establishment. But
For
they seem
sure.
to be ignoring that right now. To all of
Oh,
that, floor is yours.
yeah, okay. Well, let me take it piece by piece. I'll
Sure.
start from the end and work my way back.
No problem.
Number one, you will never hear me pander to this right-wing narrative that racism in this country doesn't exist. That's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's something that is cheap, kind of WWE politics. It's what they serve you on Fox News and CNN. That's the conventional and proverbial battle of political clash in America. Is it racist or is it not?
Right.
There's racism in America. There's no doubt about it. There's been racism in the past. The question is, what is the answer? What's the solution? And I do believe that there are people who may have benefited from DEI programs, or let's say affirmative action, to take it back to something that has real teeth, who did have the merit and got in with those programs. The question becomes, and this is what really opened my eyes, when George Floyd died, I was as appalled and shocked as anybody. And now I do think that Derek Chauvin's prosecution was political.
Okay.
Okay. They
Okay.
prosecuted him because they wanted the riots to stop in the streets. They didn't want to have any more conversations or
Fair.
riots or right. So the
Fair.
prosecution was political.
Mhm.
But I am not quote unquote loyal to a thin blue line and police backing at any and all circumstances. Not my deal. My deal is something more biblical, like when Paul said to the centurion guard, I'm a Roman citizen. Do you have the right to bind and beat a Roman citizen who has not yet seen court? And I think Donald Trump in the MAGA movement is now more privy to the dangers of a police state and a security state and letting the courts have more power, or let's say the justice system, for lack of a better, be more all-encompassing, the justice system to have more power than they're supposed to. And so we're still working out that Gordian knot. Now, to back up to what you said about the border and the immigrants, um, here's the thing. The courts have long been politicized. They've long been politically weaponized. And we got into that when we started letting presidents who are party loyal appoint judges, and it happened on both sides.
Yes,
and there
it did.
started to be this game of who has the political power in the judiciary with judge appointments. I'll say this. When a country is in the place that our country was at, it is very difficult for me to continue to believe in the rule of law, even though my Republican counterparts have such a dying loyalty to the concept. They all say rule of law, democracy. Listen, your rule of law is only as good as the lawmakers who uphold it.
That's
If your
true.
lawmakers aren't righteous, then there is no rule of law.
Right.
And what we saw, the Democrat establishment that also includes some very rhino, we call them, or rats, I
Yeah.
call them, Republicans against Trump, Republicans that have more loyalty to the liberal order than they do to the Republican ideas or the Republican Party. We have seen some very dangerous things happen in this country in the legal system. Steve Bannon's prosecution was one of them.
Mhm.
Obviously, we don't have to go into detail, but Merrick Garland and Eric Holder and all these guys also denied being subpoenaed and speaking before the Congress, and they didn't serve a day in jail. They give Steve Bannon 4 months. Why? Because he's powerful, because he speaks the truth, and because he represents a change of the brand of the Republican Party that neither the Republican Party or Democrat Party want to see. So I have to support Donald Trump in some sort, in some instance, in playing hardball and smash mouth with the courts and saying, wait a minute, we're not going to play this game and pretend like the courts are level. And guess what? As a black man, and for many young black men who are leaning towards the Republican Party and Donald Trump, we know the courts to be unjust. We just didn't understand the depths of it. We
Mm.
didn't realize it could happen to the white Republicans who we have as boogeymen in our heads. And that's why when Donald Trump was arraigned and they booked him, it was a brilliant move by him. As soon as they booked him, there were blacks and Hispanics and Asians and all kinds of minorities across this country that said, damn, that corrupt system. When George Floyd died, they chanted, the whole system is guilty. Damn, that system is really guilty. And guess what? Now some white folks are starting to feel it too. And praise be to God for that. Because now we're starting to cross the Rubicon
Mhm.
where we see the real danger and threat to freedom.
Getting back to George Floyd, and I know you keep bringing up Steve Bannon and how he was wrong and how how you feel about him. I have to confess to you, I'm not comfortable with a lot of things that Steve Bannon said, but that brother, that man is smart as hell. He knows what he's talking about, and you better bring the rain information-wise if you're gonna deal with him, because I say this, he means what he says. All right, and he has information to back it up. So I had to go back and watch his show like 2 or 3 times and listen to every word he said. I'm like, damn, I gotta watch this guy right here because he's not a joke and he's not playing around. But I'll get back to you, Royce, with George Floyd, because when he was killed by police officer Derek Chauvin, you led what you called a peaceful protest, but said the mainstream media misrepresented those efforts. How did they do that?
I mean, this is a very important node in my own journey,
Mm-hmm.
both as a young man in general, but certainly politically.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember, I fought against the NBA. I got blackballed. Later on, I would go to live in Canada for 2 years and play in Canada. This was 2015, 16, and 17. I was living in London, Ontario. And it was around the time that Jordan Peterson encountered his troubles with the government there around Bill C-16, which was an argument about gender identity in legislation, essentially. And I remember watching, look, I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's one of the more gay communities in the country. My mom was an esthetician my whole life. She worked to pay bills, our rent with her tips, okay? So I grew up in the hair salon and in the spa world and in the beauty business. And I knew and grew up knowing gay men And it was very different back in the 90s than it is today, I'll say that. But I wasn't unfamiliar with the gay community. Also, playing basketball, you meet a lot of female basketball players who are lesbian, and that's fine. That's their choice, all good. Point I'm making is I wasn't familiar with this transgender pronoun thing. And I was in Canada, and I remember watching the news like, man, this guy, Jordan Peterson, sounds logical, sane, reasonable, actually really smart, to be honest. And I don't understand why they're attacking him. But I was playing basketball, and we won 2 national championships in Canada back to back. So you know how you watch things, you know, kind of, but it's in passing, okay? I come back to the States in 2018-19. I joined the Big Three, and I'm talking about all these political issues in the Big Three, you know, Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and the Federal Reserve and so on and so forth. And the Uyghurs, okay, the Uyghurs in China, that their persecution. And so when 2020 hit and George Floyd died, I was like, I know what's going to happen here. This is going to be one of the biggest, I could just feel it. This is going to be one of the biggest things in American history. And it's right here in my backyard where I grew up. I mean, 36th, 38th in Chicago on the south side of Minneapolis. I used to run the streets and play at the parks and you know, my whole life. So it's home. So I went to the front line because there were all of these people organizing these protests who I didn't know from being from the city. I didn't know them from any wakes. I didn't know them from any weddings. I didn't know them from any barbecues. I didn't know them from any of the grade schools or the after school programs or the basketball team. I didn't know them. And so it was odd to me. And then when I researched them, I realized a lot of these community activists were imports from colleges, you know, in California or somewhere else that were given a position by politicians who had been elected, okay? So I'm out on the streets and I'm saying, listen, we're going to go to the front door of the Federal Reserve. You all believe that the problem in this country is policing. The problem is not policing. The problem is how the money works. And if we want to talk about follow the money or the whole system being guilty, I can show you just how guilty it is. The Federal Reserve is the epitome of corruption in America. And it has a downstream effect on every working class citizen, including Blacks, Latinos, and everybody else up and down in between. So when I did that, naturally, people were excited to see me leading. They're like, oh, shit, Royce White's out here. And look, there's 10,000 people with him. How did he do that? And they even wrote stories about me in Washington Post and whatnot. And they were like, hey, he's a rising young activist. And when I was out there, I heard something that just blew my mind. Black trans lives matter. I didn't even know what trans meant at the time, to be honest, Stephen A. I had no clue. And I didn't push back on it right away because I didn't know what it meant to push back. But when they explained to me that I needed to organize these demonstrations and who spoke at these demonstrations based on people's sexual identity and sexual preference, boom, me and the local community activists in Minnesota were at odds. And I didn't back down because, you know, there's no back down in me. And that, and I said, that's the story. So when George Floyd died, I led these protests, and the local activists who had already been here as an extension of BLM, they didn't want to, you know, have anything to do with me because I wasn't pro LGBTQ pronoun. And so there was another instance where the bubbling up of the Black men in this country who have come to reject the lunacy on the far left happened right there in 2020 in the streets of Minneapolis, and the mainstream media never covered it that way. They don't want you to know that a young Black man who didn't graduate college, came from a single mother household in a blue collar community, can tell you how global finance works.
As a member of the media for decades, I can't even disagree with you. There is no doubt that there was stuff that folks did not want to discuss. I was covering sports, so it was different for me, but I'm just saying there was no doubt that you're absolutely right, that there was so much stuff being covered up. And I got to get a little bit uncomfortable with you for a second here. During the 2024 campaign, you raised controversy with what they labeled as anti-Semitic remarks. I don't know what you said. I didn't know anything about that. Civil judgments for unpaid child support, and a finance report that showed more than $1 million of donor money went to credit card fees, which was nearly 70% of your $1.43 million in operating expenses. First of all, is that stuff true? If it's false, say so. And number two, to Minnesotans out there who would use that information obviously emanating from the left about you, to decide how they're going to vote, why should they vote for you at this moment in time? Floor is yours.
Okay. Well, number one, I hope I get a little bit of time to explain the three of those thoroughly because they're very important.
Please.
But I will say that it's not the left. It's not emanating from the left. Those
Okay.
stories, those lies and rumors are emanating from the establishment GOP, who's more afraid of a
Really?
young black man talking about the Federal Reserve than they are an AOC or Ilhan Omar. In fact, a lot of the establishment GOP loves Ilhan Omar because they raise a lot of money off of her. They're more afraid of me being in office than they are keeping Ilhan Omar in. And they're afraid of me saying that. They're afraid of me being on your show and saying it to your audience because this is the real politic of America. Okay, let me go back.
Sure.
Number one, you asked me about uh, the 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 credit
Well,
card processing fees.
yes.
That's from this campaign, not the 2024 campaign.
Okay.
That's from 2026.
Okay.
And how that works in short is the establishment Republicans like Tom Emmer or Mitch McConnell or used to be Kevin McCarthy, now probably Mike Johnson and many of the others who have a lot of power there in D.C. When you go to run and you run under a certain political party affiliation, they have access to the Republican Party donor data, and they are usually unwilling to give that data, give open access to that data to candidates who they think are a threat to their established power base. That would be me. Me and Tom Emmer, we don't get along. We're adversaries. We're both Republicans, but we don't like each other. And I don't make any qualms about it. I think he's a globalist, just like Hakeem Jeffries. And that's why if you go to AIPAC's landing page, I'll get to your anti-Semitic question in a moment.
Okay.
If you go to AIPAC's landing page, you'll find there are 6 politicians represented on that landing page: Mike Johnson, Scalise, Tom Emmer, Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and Aguilar. There's no better example of what we call the uniparty than those 6 politicians. One of them happens to be here in Minnesota. So they don't give you access to those lists. So we, as candidates who are kind of rogue, kind of, out there in the wilderness on our own, have to do third-party deals with bundlers.
Mm.
And these bundlers charge a high commission. Now, they charge a high commission on the first donation. So let's say Stephen A. Smith supports Royce White. You get an email from these bundlers. You send me $100. They'll take $85 the first time. Now, your name is on my list. When I send you the next email, I get 100% or 95% of the donation. Okay. So the credit card processing fees are because on first pass, I was able to raise that much money with the people we came into contact with, but they took a big piece of it. Okay, now to go back to your question about anti-Semitism, because I think it might be the most important one. When I announced my campaign in 2022, I did it in front of the Federal Reserve. I was trying to run against Ilhan Omar for CD5, Congressional District 5, basically greater Minneapolis, and that's actually where the Fed is located, downtown Minneapolis on Hennepin. So when I announced my campaign, my run for Congress, I did it in front of the Fed, and the Star Tribune, which is the local newspaper of record here in Minneapolis, asked me about globalism. And you can go look this up for anybody who wants to fact check me. The article's still up. They asked me what I meant by globalism, and I said it's an economic attack on the nation state and its citizens, mostly the working class. They wrote that globalism, to even say globalism, is a dog whistle for anti-Semitism. And that just it blew my mind. And it's something that's carried on alongside of me because the Republican Party has this strange obsession with Israel in which they are unable to see the very obvious contradiction in how they talk about all other issues except this one. And I just won't do that with them. Now, do I recognize the biblical significance of Israel? Absolutely. Do I have Jewish friends? Yes. One of my business partners and my co-host on Please Call Me Crazy sometimes is David Penn, Professor Penn. He has a great podcast too. He's a Ukrainian Jew. He's like family to me. So I have a bunch of people in my life who are Jewish who are like family to me, really. So I'm not anti-Semitic at all. But it is an example of how and I don't mean they as in the liberal left media, they'll piggyback off of it. But this was that was more intended to disenfranchise me to the Republican evangelical voter out there who hears anything anti-Semitic and they automatically turn the channel.
So essentially, because I got to get ready to get on out of here, but that's the bad news. The good news is that, my brother, this will not be the last time you will be on this show. I don't play that mess. I'm fair-minded. What I don't understand, I don't understand. I'm open about it. I admit it, and I'm open to learning from both sides of the aisle. That's me. And by the way, ain't nobody gonna silence your voice on this show. Everything you said is gonna be over the airwaves. Trust me on that. All right. Let me end this by asking you this question, though. You just talked about the GOP, establishment, essentially. And to some degree, that's against you. You know how the left would feel about you because you're on the opposite aisle. All right? When you consider the climate that we're living in, how are you going to get it done? How are you going to win this election in Minnesota?
Well, brother, I appreciate you having me on, and I'll come back on anytime. I love what you're doing. I love that you're starting to have, dissenting voices on the platform and show. I can't tell you how important it is, and I can't tell you how grateful I really am, because it's not about me. It's about the entire conversation being opened up to some things that people need to hear, and this is probably most important.
Royce, I never had this platform before. When I was doing sports, you know, I
Couldn't do
mean,
it.
if you
Right,
look at
couldn't do it.
the diversity that comes on ESPN, I got a lot to do with that. I have this platform that I own and operate, and I'm getting into politics. I never had to do it before, so I've always been this guy. I've always been willing to listen to both sides.
Thank you. And I appreciate it greatly. And look, this GOP thing is probably the most important. The
Sure.
mainstream media for so long has created a WWE politics narrative where you have Republicans and Democrats, and they hate each other. They fight, mostly the uniparty of Republicans and Democrats who protect the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, or what they call the international rules-based order, work together behind the scenes to create legislation that destroy the value of American citizenship. I stand against that uniparty. And so what the GOP has functioned as is and Donald Trump has changed this. He took it over. He punched him in the gut, and now they have to eat crow and bend the knee. And I kind of enjoy watching it, because they all try to take him out. And this was Christie and Romney and Cheney. I mean, how did the Democrats ever side with Dick Cheney? The guy's a convicted, he should be a convicted war criminal, and he's definitely a warmonger.
Iraq War.
But anyway, the point is that what they functioned as is a vanguard to keep minorities out of the Republican Party. They are the outer bastion of New World Order. The Minnesota GOP, this is what they tell you. We got to get new voters. We got to get new Republicans. But they don't want to go down into the Twin Cities. And then they'll say, well, Royce has too many Twin Cities roots. We can't trust that he's actually Republican. And then the white rural Republicans who are Christian or whatever else the case may be, libertarian, whatever, when they try and come into the party after being motivated by Donald Trump's, movement, they try and keep them out. So what are they actually functioning as? They are functioning as the controlled opposition intended to make sure Black people, young Black men specifically, never find their way into the party they should have rightfully always been in and had a very, very important influence in. And guess what? I'm not here to fight that battle with the entirety of American politics. All I can do in Minnesota and on your show and anywhere else, tell people the truth, give you the facts, the history, post-World War II Democrat liberal order. This was the restructuring of the global finance system, Bretton Woods Conference, the World Bank, the dollar, and all of the other stuff in between.
Right.
Mostly predicated on national security and foreign policy. And this was when you said allies earlier. I don't want to go back to that. We'll talk about another time. But when you said our allies, I'm not so sure they're our allies.
Okay.
The European Union has to decide the fate of the European Union, and it can't be on the backs of the American working class, because the Europeans have a working class that need to pay up as well. So that's what we're fighting against. That's what I'm fighting against. I appreciate the time. I don't know if I can win in Minnesota, but I'm 34 years old. I started early for a reason. I'm going to keep going until my heart stops beating. And I tell the truth. And guess what? The people get to decide. If you want to vote for another Amy Klobuchar, then I tell people, hey, you get the government you deserve. I guarantee you this: I would represent people in a much more honest way than maybe any politician that I could name.
I can respect that. I have to listen to that. I can't ignore that. Last question, very last question. I need a quick answer here, Royce. I'm going to put you on the spot. There is no MAGA movement. There is no Donald Trump. Which side would you fall on, considering what you've said about the left and what you've said about the GOP? If there were no Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, MAGA movement, which side would you favor?
I mean, I'm so close to Steve Bannon, it's hard for me to say that.
No, I'm saying if you take him away, take him out of the mix, take Trump out of the mix, take MAGA out of the mix. It's just the conventional GOP that you decried and the left. Who you rolling with?
Well, without Donald Trump, I'd have to say I'd run independent. Or I would have tried to fight my way up to the top of the Democrat Party and been smacked down the way I think you may run into, actually, in fact, if you run on the Democrat side. But I'd have to say independent. And I probably would have had a very tough time winning as an independent in any office all across the country because the party or the independent just doesn't have that political power and machine and sort of tribalness to it. So, but without a Donald Trump, the Republican Party is the Republican Party of George Bush. And there is no greater threat to freedom and American stability than the neocon warmongering of the George Bush types in the Republican Party.
Wow. Royce White, candidate for senator for the state of Minnesota. Man, listen, I didn't expect this kind of conversation. I wanted to introduce you to my audience as a potential senator in 2026. I can't tell you how much I enjoy talking to you. We'll get into what you've been critical about me with next time and all when we got more time, but I'm all good with you. I mean, I think that what you're saying is you've given us a lot of food for thought, man, and I sincerely thank you for that. And this will not be the last time I will have you on because I think America needs to hear more of what you have to say, especially before the election as we look forward to picking our politicians, electing them, holding them accountable, etc. We need to hear from people like you more. So you always have a home on this show, my brother. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, brother. Godspeed to you. Appreciate
All right,
it.
man. Talk to you soon. One and only Royce White, right here with Stephen A. Smith.